there's something missing here. And it might be a bit more complicated than you think. If you've been on TikTok or talked to your chronically aligned cousin at some point over the past 5 years, then chances are you probably already know about liminal spaces. But for those of you who are unfamiliar, a liminal space is a space that has been taken out of its original context in some way, shape, or form. Whether an abandoned hotel or a desolate McDonald's playroom, the aesthetic tends to lend itself to the very surreal and melancholy, almost like seeing pictures captured from some forgotten dream from long ago. We've all been there. You're going through the motions of life when suddenly you're struck by deja vu. Things feel strangely familiar and yet altogether very unreal. If you're anything like me, maybe you even tried to capture this feeling only to produce the most dogshit picture ever taken. But what's really incredible about liminal spaces is that at their best, they can actually manage to capture this feeling pretty successfully, which is what makes them so special. My first introduction to liminal spaces came way back in 2019 when videos like Places You've Seen Before or Strangely Familiar Places first started popping up in my YouTube feed. These videos were essentially 10 to 20 minute slideshows of liminal spaces playing over ambient music, but still, in spite of how minimalistic they seemed, I remember being really moved by them. And this upwelling of emotion was not only because of the pictures themselves, but also because of the comment sections. Seeing people react to these pictures, which seem to be taken straight from my deepest, most subconscious, most intimate childhood memories, was really validating and comforting. It was really special to see just how many people could resonate with these pictures and in turn resonate with my own lived experiences. No matter how different we all are, this low-res picture of a defunct mini golf course can bring us all together, and that's really beautiful. Obviously, the liminal space community has grown a lot and come a long way since then, and there's been no shortage of YouTube commentary and discussion around it. But I feel like I haven't seen a lot of people who are interested in examining the community behind the liminal space phenomenon rather than just the trend itself. The liminal aesthetic is one of the most versatile and widespread on the internet, and I think that there's a lot to be learned from the individuals and groups that have chosen to embrace this aesthetic, as well as what it represents, how it's interpreted, and what it can tell us about internet culture as a whole. In my opinion, the main two draws to liminal spaces are universal relatability and nostalgia, two things that create a brew for something with absolute triple platinum virality on the internet. But through it all, there are two internet subcultures that have really risen above the rest in terms of embracing liminal spaces into their communities, and these are horror and nostalgia posting. I think both of these communities share, reproduce, and interpret liminal photography in really interesting and contrasting ways. But seeing as it was just Halloween, I'll start out with horror has been around on the internet for basically as long as the internet's existed. From chain emails to ARGs to creepypasta to Markiplier Let's Plays, online horror communities have overseen the creation of countless speak-ups, many of which have even gone on to international acclaim. Trying to summarize the history of internet horror is a whole other video on its own. The genre is constantly being changed and redefined as trends flourish and fade. But to put it simply, in recent times, I've noticed a bit of shift away from Jeff the Killer and more towards Jeff the Miller. Because he's always milling about liminal spaces. Indeed, for many netizens, liminal spaces are inextricably linked to horror and fear. Open up any indie horror project from the past 5 years, and chances are there will be some sort of reference to or inspiration taken from the aesthetic. I've even heard some people argue that a liminal photo isn't really complete without some sort of paranormal monster hidden in the background. The perfect culmination of this liminal horror concept, as well as arguably the most influential and important liminal space of all time, is of course the Backrooms. The Backrooms is a 4chan creepypasta that was posted on /X in 2019. The original post describes an endless parallel universe of nonsensical yellow walls and fluorescent lighting that can only be accessed by no clipping out of reality. It's fun, it's creepy, and like many other successful creepypastas, it leaves plenty of room for others to expand upon. Expand they have. The Backrooms, as it's known today, is sort of like a collaborative internet horror writing project, sort of like the SCP Foundation. Contributors to the Backrooms lore take other liminal spaces and use them to inspire their own endless mazes, inhabited by custom creatures and monsters and even magical items to collect. The original 4chan post has been repurposed into Level 0, while Level 5 is an endless hotel, Level 7 is water-themed, and Level 9 is a suburban dystopia, maybe even an opportunity for my photography to take off. Influential creators in the fandom include Kane Pixels, a high schooler whose series of YouTube short films has amassed like a zillion views on YouTube and who is now slated to direct a Backrooms movie with A24. Totally not jealous of that at all. The Backrooms wiki pages are also important cornerstones, as these are where Backrooms lore is cataloged and stored. If you're interested in learning more about the Backrooms, I'd highly recommend checking out these wiki pages for yourself. Looking at their newsletters and page layouts and submission guidelines, you really get a sense of how much passion and dedication goes into maintaining this project and how much love the fanbase has for liminal spaces in general. But even so, the Backrooms community has not been immune from its fair share of criticism. Ever since the inception of this creative side of the fandom, supporters of the original post have had their doubts about turning what was originally a crushing, endless nexus of torment and loneliness into what is essentially a survival horror game. I think there's an implicit subtlety to what makes liminal spaces scary that a lot of online creators seem to misunderstand or misinterpret. The horror of liminal spaces comes from a deeply intimate and personal and individual fear of being lost and alone in a place you forgot to remember, not the horror of, holy shit, the plague goblins are on my tail, I'm almost out of almond water. In fact, going one step further, there's a lot of liminal enthusiasts online who contest the idea that there's anything inherently scary about liminal spaces at all. Diving into the r/liminal spaces subreddit, there's dozens of posts lamenting the fact that liminal spaces have become so closely attached to the horror community when, for many, they're actually a source of great solace and comfort. Which brings us to... Is anyone here old enough to remember nostalgia posting? Drop a like if you do. Nostalgia posting is another thing that's been around the internet forever, is constantly changing, and has recently adopted liminal spaces as a big part of its aesthetic. Pictures that feel like 2009, pictures that smell like 2012, pictures that taste like 1993. Pick a year and one of the 5 senses and watch the views come rolling in, baby. Since the Backrooms sort of fell out of fashion after the pandemic, in recent times, liminal spaces have become a lot more associated with nostalgia and bittersweet memories, especially on platforms with demographics that skew younger like TikTok and Instagram. Liminal space compilations with nostalgic audios and melancholy captions can garner millions upon millions of views, as well as comment sections filled with netizens reminiscing about the halcyon days of their youths. I'd do anything to have this back. Where did this world go? We didn't know how good we had it. I wish I could feel like this again. What strikes me the most about these types of comments is the implication that the memories and feelings attached to these posts are no longer accessible. We will never go back to being a kid. We will never experience that type of carefree innocence again. That's why nostalgia posts are so appealing, because they give our old, jaded selves the chance to relive those feelings for a little while. This is probably why so many popular types of liminal spaces are in places that are so closely associated with childhood. Playrooms, arcades, schools, party rooms, roller rinks. These are places that many of us grew up attending, thus the strong feelings that are stirred when we see them so empty and abandoned. But the fact is, most of the locations in these posts are far more accessible to the average viewer than they imply. Yes, the feelings attached might be a little different. It's a lot more fun to go to the McDonald's playroom as a kid than as an adult who pays taxes and knows about staph infections. But what's stopping you from going to the pool, or taking a walk in a public park, or throwing a Halloween party with your friends? What's stopping you from decorating on Christmas or going to a Walmart? And I know what you're thinking. All the nostalgia warriors in my comments are probably going, well, Annie, those things are just worse now. And to some extent, that's probably true. But why does it have to be that way? Why are so many of our once beloved community spaces now so deteriorated? Why have they experienced such a drop in quality, a fall from grace? And could it have something to do with the fact that we've already started to treat them like relics of the past, even while they're still standing? The definition of a liminal space is, in its simplest form, a man-made structure with no people in it. Click on any YouTube video essay about liminal spaces and they'll probably mention this exact criteria. Malls, bookstores, offices, we expect these things to be populated, so when they're not, it's just quieting, thus liminality. Going off this definition, I feel like a lot of the presence of liminal spaces online can be explained by people trying to find a reason for those places to be empty. In the case of internet horror, it's because of supernatural meddling. Evil monsters and entities who lurk in the shadows and steal people away into the night. In the case of nostalgia posting, it's because liminal spaces represent memories and emotions that are no longer accessible to us. Our childhoods are dead, and the desolation of these once bright spaces represents the innocence that all of us have lost. But there's something that both of these interpretations are missing, which is the fact that a lot of these liminal spaces used to be actual, physical locations in the real world, with real reasons why they are now defunct. YouTuber Jaden Salad's series on finding the locations of popular liminal spaces is what really prompted me to start thinking about this more deeply. Again, when I first was exposed to liminal spaces, I was perfectly happy to just accept these pictures as like dusty, vague memories that came from some repressed part of my tortured psyche. In fact, knowing where the pictures came from probably would have ruined some of that illusion for me. I would have been resistant to knowing where these pictures came from. But Jaden Salad's series really turned that around for me, once again, not just because of the videos themselves, even though they are great, but also because of the comment sections. People in the comments recognized the spaces that Jaden pointed out. They recalled spending time there. They shared memories with people who live close to them. Despite the fact that liminal spaces are so closely associated with feelings of isolation and loneliness, all these places were once so dearly inhabited and loved and lived in. People existed there. They formed connections, they had summer jobs, they had vacations, they realized their ambitions. All the popular liminal spaces in Jane Salad's videos were once so dearly cherished by their communities. And now, as of today, most of them have gone bankrupt. Nowhere is this phenomenon better reflected than in my own community with our own local dying mall. Now, malls are a big part of the liminal genre. Maybe not so much as hotels or playrooms, but if you Google liminal space, you will not have any trouble encountering a nice liminal mall picture to put in your TikTok slideshow. Now, here in the Midwest, we don't exactly have a lot going on in terms of entertainment. Our idea of a fun night out is maybe going to Culver's and then walking around Target for a while if you're feeling really crazy. So to have a place to shop and work and hang out after school was a big deal, and this mall especially was a big pillar of our community. Nearly all my friends and I got our ears pierced with the piercing pagoda. I got all my back to school clothes there. I took so many teriyaki chicken samples from the food court that they actually started to like recognize me, and every time I walk in the mall they'd be like, oh my god, there's like teriyaki chicken girl. But like many malls across America, this mall is itself slowly turning into a liminal space. A few weeks ago, I forced my good friend Alyssa to go with me there to get some B-roll, and I was shocked by just how easy it was to find places that looked taken straight out of a liminal photo. We go entire stretches of mall without encountering a single other person. It's like more storefronts were shuttered and dark than were open. This arcade in particular felt especially liminal. It was built just a few years ago to try and revitalize the mall, but clearly it didn't work out because it was extremely empty in there. So empty, in fact, that we were even able to sneak into a few areas where we weren't really supposed to be. Now, I know there's a lot of reasons people don't really go to the mall anymore. Safety is a big concern. Someone actually tragically lost their life at this mall a few years ago. Also, this is less of an issue, but the mall really isn't managed as well as it could be. I think the owners have been trying to sell it for a few years now, so they haven't really had a lot of incentive to draw people in. But probably the biggest reason this mall is dying, as it is for all malls, is technology. The sheer convenience of online shopping platforms like Amazon and Etsy have made it extremely difficult for brick and mortar places to compete. I myself am definitely guilty of this. If given the choice between going to the mall and buying a shirt versus ordering it online for way cheaper with more sizing and color options without running the risk of encountering a group of mean preteens who will make fun of me for shopping a Hot Topic, I'm probably going to choose to order online, but I think it's crucial for us to consider just what we're sacrificing here for the sake of our convenience. While traversing the mall, Alyssa and I reminisced a lot about the memories that we made there, and one story she told in particular stood out for me.
I used to beg my dad every day after preschool to take me to the mall so I could eat mac and cheese from this specific food stand, and I came here so often that my dad ended up becoming friends with the person who ran the food stand, who was this like, I don't know if she was elderly, but she was this like Chinese woman. And I remember that when they were closing their food stand because like it wasn't profitable anymore, she and my dad were like talking about it. And then that was like the last time that we ever saw her. That's so sad.
Because Alyssa and her family went to the mall consistently after school, Alyssa's dad was able to make a friend, someone who shared their cultural background and lived experiences. Because this mall existed to be a physical meeting place for members of the community, Alyssa's dad met someone in the community, face to face, and they were able to form a bond. This type of communal social setting is known in sociology as a third place. A place outside of work or home for people to attend regularly and form connections with others. Nowadays, social networking is increasingly moving online, and while there is something to be said about how it's made certain types of connection more accessible, social isolation and mental health issues are currently at an all-time high, especially among young people who are not coincidentally the most online. According to a 2022 survey by Cigna, 79% of adults aged 18 to 24 struggle with feelings of loneliness, a 64% increase from 2018. And not so coincidentally, this transition has coincided with the loss of third places. Not just malls, but roller rinks, arcades, bars, coffee shops, libraries, parks, and bookstores. All places, if you recall, that are commonly associated with liminal spaces. And while the pandemic certainly played a role in this, it also isn't the only determining factor. One Business Insider survey indicates that even from 2014 to 2019, before the pandemic, the amount of time the average American spent hanging out with friends decreased 37%. As the digital world becomes more and more accessible and enticing, and as the attention economy grows, people are less incentivized to go outside, and thus isolation flourishes. Now, I'd be remiss not to mention that there's a whole host of factors driving the disappearance of third places. It's a lot more complicated than just phone bad, outside good. Cost of living, as we all know, has risen significantly over the past few years, and that, coupled with the rampant inflation and rise of mental health issues, has made going out on a Friday night a lot harder for a lot of people than it used to be. But what's been interesting to observe is that even people who can't afford and readily access these third places and even have an interest in doing so are going less and less. For instance, public libraries. Library visitation has been in decline since around 2010, and while the issues I mentioned before, pandemic, cost of living, certainly play a role, according to this article in Publishers Weekly by Tim Coates, the main reason people aren't going to libraries isn't lack of access to the library or even lack of interest in library books, but rather because printed media is becoming obsolete as a medium because of... You get the point. So our communal spaces are being outcompeted by technology. What's the point? Who cares? Well, clearly the liminal genre does. Once again, posts commemorating these places get tons of engagement. Clearly there's a demand for this type of content, but is content enough? Is it enough to look at a picture of a place we once cherished, or that reminds us of a place we once cherished and remember it for a while? Is it enough to participate in a genre that prioritizes the preservation of those feelings, all while the actual places that we claim to love, many of which still exist, languish and die? What if, instead of looking at a picture of an abandoned bookstore on our phone and feeling sad about it, we actually went out to a real bookstore and walked around, maybe even bought something? Wouldn't that be fun? It's still possible. And let me be clear for a second, I love liminal spaces. I love nostalgia posts. I don't think the genre itself is inherently harmful, but I do worry that in all the mythos and lore and fiction and nostalgic haze surrounding the liminal genre, we're missing the fact that it exists as a very real reflection of the loss of our communal spaces, a loss that we as individuals still have the power and time to counteract. We can still support the places that exist with our time and dollars. Obviously, it won't be exactly the same as you remember, and it definitely won't be as easy as just scrolling on TikTok or Reels, but does it have to be? Nostalgia is a very strong, very powerful emotion, but in this way it's also very dangerous because it can lull us into a sense of complacency. When we look at a liminal space, the aesthetic is so potent and the artistry is so compelling that it almost feels like we're really there. But we're not really there. We're on Instagram, or we're on TikTok. We're giving our time and money and attention to the very tech companies that contributed to these places' downfall. There seems to be this attitude around the internet that the era of malls and play centers and arcades is already over and bygone, but these places still exist. Yes, it's true, there's less of them and they are worse now, but think of how much worse they will be in the future if we don't continue to fight for their existence. You still have time. You can still go back and create new memories of the places you once held dear, and in a way, I think we all have a responsibility to. Big tech companies are continuing to try and steal away our most cherished human innate experiences and then sell them back to us at a premium. It's our responsibility as consumers to continue to resist in whatever way we can the forces that drive us towards convenience at the cost of our humanity. I know it may seem hopeless and impossible, but if we don't have faith that our choices can have an impact, then what possible chance do we have at realizing a better future? Oftentimes I look around at this digital hell we've created for ourselves and I wonder just what kind of world we're setting up for the next generation. Where are the kids of tomorrow going to make memories, form bonds, hang out with friends after school? Where are they going to go to feel connected to their peers and communities and just the world in general? Where are the kids of tomorrow going to go to feel human? Unless we get out there and support these places, then pretty soon we'll only be able to experience them as pictures on a screen. That's not a world that I want to live in. I'm sure it's not a world that you want to live in either. So, what will you do to stop the places you love the most from disappearing? Remember, for a space to qualify as liminal, it needs to be completely uninhabited. So, will you be the person to breathe the life back into these places? Or is it enough to simply surrender to the liminal?